Hi, I'm John Iredale, Pro-Vice-Chancellor here at the University of Bristol. Welcome to the next in our series of Fireside Chats, discussing and interfacing with key members of staff who've been involved in leading the charge in relationship to the way in which the university is addressing the COVID challenge. In many ways, the COVID crisis has thrown into relief the deep and varied connections between the universities and society, the university's civic role. It's widely agreed that higher education institutions have a responsibility to deliver activity for the public good. And I, for one, am very proud of the contribution our own Bristol community is making in this area. I've been fortunate through this series of conversations to speak to those researchers leading the charge in everything from biomedical research into testing and vaccine development through to policy research around domestic violence and public health guidance. But as we emerge from the initial emergency response to COVID and coronavirus, what is the role of the Civic University in supporting local, regional and national COVID-19 recovery efforts? To provide some insights into the question, I'm delighted to be joined for this episode by Dr Helen Manchester, who is Reader in Digital Inequalities and Urban Futures in the School of Education, and Morag McDermont, Professor of Socio-Legal Studies here at the Bristol Law School. Helen and Morag are members of Recover, the University of Bristol's new COVID civic response and civic futures research group. So Helen, Morag, welcome to you both, and a really big thank you for giving up the time to come and have a conversation this afternoon.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John. It's good to hear.
So Helen, why don't you kick off by telling us a bit about the Recover group and how it all came about?
Yeah, I guess the Recover group came about because a number of us in social science and law faculty have been working with civil society, with community and voluntary sector organisations and partners, and also with the City Office and the Mayor's Office and the City Council, working with them as partners really on research projects and bids. So this includes Morag and myself, who set up the City Fellows programme, which works alongside the City Office and the Social Justice Project and the Wellspring Settlement. Also Susan Holford, who's been working with the Bristol Digital Futures Institute to develop partnerships and relationships across the city. Sean Fox and Alan MacLeod, who've been working with the City Office and internationally, in fact, on embedding the Sustainable Development Goals into the work of the Council. And also John Fox and his team in sociology and politics, who have been working on the Everyday Integration project. So there's lots of activity going on all the time in the university, yeah. I suppose, that's developing these partnerships. When COVID struck, we kind of all realised that our ongoing research was perhaps not possible in the same way, but that we still wanted to retain those really important relationships with our partners. So all of us kind of independently went to our partners and said, okay, what can we do? How can we, as academics and social science academics, how can we support the really important work that many of them were doing in response to the COVID pandemic?
But from what you're saying, it sounds like you've been working quite closely with the City Office in terms of your particular area of interest. It might be interesting to hear a bit more about that.
Yeah, so the City Office is part of the City Council at the moment, but it's also works independently from it. And the big push here is around collaborative governance. It's around getting the citizens and different actors in the city to work together to solve some of the city's long-term problems, really. So we, through the City Fellows programme, had a very close relationship with the City Office, and we asked them right at the beginning of the pandemic, okay, how can we continue to work with you? Because they were all being asked to do all kinds of sort of disaster crisis management tasks. And what they said to us right from the very, very beginning was that we're interested in the city's recovery. We're interested in thinking now about how we can come out of this as a resilient city, as a city where the communities that we all live in are resilient in the future against what we know is going to be a terrible shock to the city system. So I guess we've been thinking about that throughout this pandemic, really, and thinking about how can social science and law expertise be used to support that recovery program and working with the city office on that.
Oh, that sounds terrific.
Yeah.
Absolutely fantastic. And Morag, I know that there's been work with the community and voluntary sector, and that's very much the area that you've been involved with. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yes. So there's a number of us who for quite a long time have been working with the community and the voluntary sector in the city, and very much seeing the community sector as being very central in terms of enabling communities at the margins of the city to be potentially part of the decision making of the city. And that was the impetus for the City Fellows programme that Helen has been talking about. You probably also know that we've been working in Barton Hill with what used to be Barton Hill Settlement. They're now called Wellspring Settlement. And in a few months' time, the university will be opening up a micro campus up at Wellspring Settlement. So our relationship with Wellspring Settlement is very strong. And at the beginning of the pandemic crisis and just before lockdown, in fact, I was at a meeting at Wellspring Settlement where they were talking about how they were going to respond. Now the city has set up a number of community hubs throughout the city to deliver the local response. And the community hubs, the community anchor organisations like Wellspring Settlement have been absolutely vital to the city's ability to be able to respond. And they've been able to for instance, work with a whole load of volunteers to be providing essential services, the prescriptions and food, and everything that's needed in this very strange times. Now, Wellspring Settlement had the foresight right at the beginning to set up a survey and begin to be talking to their service users and the people who work with them in the Lawrence Hill area, to gather information about the community's needs during the coronavirus pandemic and how they could best support them. And they asked us at the University of Bristol if we could use our research expertise to be able to analyse that data. So that's what we have been doing with them, and it's what it's enabled is I think quite a unique insight into those first few weeks of lockdown, and how people were able to respond, and of course what we were finding was that there was a great deal going on within the local community to support each other. But one of the really strong things that came out of this first survey was that what people really wanted to do was to maintain forms of social contact. Mm. That actually speaking to people on the phone on a regular basis was going to be really important. And I think that's a sort of really important message for going forward, that we can set up all these digital forms of communication, but actually what people really need is to keep that social contact. And certainly in terms of mental health issues, of generally of health issues, that's really important going forward. We're now looking at a second phase of that survey, and some of the interesting things coming out of that is how people's long-term health issues are now becoming quite a big issue in lockdown. But we're also seeing that, if you like, the unequal access of resources of people in different parts of the city are really being exposed. The people in precarious employment, for instance, are really struggling just to be able to feed themselves.
Yeah. That sobering, very sobering, and I'm intrigued, and perhaps in some ways not surprised by the findings. I mean, I don't know about you two, but I've realised just what a social animal I am, and have found the lack of social contact, direct social contact, and I'm very affluent and privileged position. Sometimes a little bit more than a frustration, and as we've heard in other podcasts, and you've just raised, Morag, you know, the issue of the impact on mental health, I think, is very easy to underestimate, and is something that we you know, we're going to need to think about very seriously, particularly if we have a second phase and folk have to self-isolate again, whether it's on an individual basis. Very, very interesting.
I think I guess one of the big worries there as well is the future of the community and voluntary sector that has been so vital in providing this support for people, especially those communities at the margins. And, you know, we know that the financial and economic outcomes of this are not going to be good for that sector. So that is a real worry going forwards, I guess.
No, I think that's you're absolutely right, and I mean, what we hear about, because of their relative importance on a national scale, is the problems that large charities like the British Heart Foundation are having. Of course, the smaller local charities are going to be really struggling because donations are down across the board, and we're going to have to think about how we address any gaps that result from this. No, I mean, it's fantastic and really important work. Presumably, Bristol isn't alone. Presumably, other universities are working within their locales to deliver similar approaches. So I'd be very interested to hear from you both what is happening and what next for the recovery, be it local or national. I don't know who to kick off with. Helen, maybe. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think it's become obvious in the sector as a whole, really, that universities have a vital role to play, a vital civic role to play, and this has just become more visible during the crisis. There was a recent survey done by Uni Alliance that asked people about this, and a very large percentage of people said that they felt that the civic role of the university was really vital, and that they saw that as a very key part of what universities contribute to society. They've been doing some great work in Newcastle, similarly talking about response, recover, renew for working with the city. I guess what we're doing in Bristol needs to, going forwards, become much more embedded within university processes, but also within the city. And our work going forwards with the city office and the city council will enable us, hopefully, to do that. So there's been various meetings happened already on how can the university, and what Marvin Rees, the mayor, who's been in all of the international media this week, calls the academic firepower of the university, and how we can contribute really to the recovery of the city. But I think what Morag and I would want to add to that is that we very much see that as being in collaboration with the community and the voluntary sector. They are the ones that have been providing all this essential support that is helping to deal with some of the inequalities that are becoming even more visible at this time.
Yeah,
Morag. Yeah, well, sort of just taking up that point, and you know, where next for the Recover Book group. There's a number of things that Helen and I and our colleagues are involved in, and one is exactly that. Is we're involved, and this is with our colleagues in professional services as well, in an exercise of interviews with our partners and potential partners throughout the city. And this has, if you like, three different aspects to it. Firstly, we are wanting to understand organisations' own views on how this pandemic is changing them as organisations, and how they will see themselves going forward. And then how they see that will then affect their long-term and strategic plans, operational plans, and how it will impact on the social economy and, if you like, the civic infrastructure of Bristol. And then the third aspect is how they would like to see their relationship with the university developing, so that, if you like, Marvin's academic firepower or whatever is able to be, we can become part of an infrastructure that supports the recovery. So there's that series of, if you like, knowledge gathering exercise. And another of the things that we're taking forward is Helen mentioned the impact on the community and voluntary sector, which is taking the brunt, if you like, of delivering at a local level, but equally are finding financially, particularly, that these times are very difficult for them. There, for instance, organisations that have developed a mix of income and things like cafes and nurseries, and their income stream is disappeared. So there is a real need to address what the future looks like for the community and voluntary sector. So we're working with Locality in the Southwest. Locality is a national network that supports community organisations. And we're working with Locality in Bristol to support them in developing their idea about how they go forward in terms of the forms of social investment that are going to be needed if they are enabled to sustain themselves as this really vital community infrastructure. And clearly this has very strong links with the work with the City Office, because it's those sort of relationships are very key. And it's a real opportunity for colleagues across social sciences who are involved, for instance, in work on inclusive economies, on data analysis, on data futures, on educational futures, to be working with the community organisations at this local level in how we shape the future of the city.
That's fantastic. And I mean, as I said earlier, the results of your research and the hard work you've both undertaken is sobering. I'd like to thank you both on behalf of the institution for everything you're doing, but also personally for taking the time to tell me about what you're up to. I know that you're both extremely busy, so I'm extremely grateful. Thank you both very much.
Thanks very much for inviting us, John.
Thank you, John.